Hey y'all! Well, let's talk today about where I've kind of landed on my 2A3 amp. And right now, this is the amp that I'm listening to most of the time. It is one built just like this. And I've done some experimentation with different transformers and different power supply kind of things, and playing around with, even played around with like one of those mesh plate EML tubes and some other things. And at least for this amplifier, this is the way I'm going to be building them. And the options are going to be, you can get them with Habuer output transformers, which are substantially cheaper, or I'm going to offer them with these ISO Tango FC12Ss, which seems like a good price point and fit for this type of amplifier. And I've got the prices on my website. I'm not going to talk about them in the video because you may watch this video 2 years from now and be like, but you said in the video they cost this. And yeah, so go look at my website for the current pricing. Unfortunately, the tariffs on some of this stuff, especially these Tango transformers, these ISO transformers, is going to impact the cost of that upgrade. So nothing I can do about that. I can't absorb that. Tariffs go away, there may be a lower delta between the two because the Habuers are made in the USA, so there's no tariff on them. Right now, these Hammond transformers, I'm not seeing the prices on them being unstabilized, but I haven't bought any in a while. And the tariff thing was kind of loosey-goosey being enforcing, and now people are getting Homeland Security letters talking about you got to buy stuff through brokers, and they're starting to really crack down on even like a $200 part wanting their tariff from it. Which in the past they had an exemption for lower priced, if it was under $600, $800 or something like that, that there wasn't any kind of custom even enforcement on it. And now they're cracking down on a $5 used vacuum tube. So anyway, didn't want to go down that road, but just explaining why there's some difference. And the Tango ones, I'm probably going to use these gold colored trim rings. And unfortunately, the last batch I got from these, there was a little bit of difference in the color. I was able to kind of buff these and get the ones that were a little darker colored to match. It's pretty close. Before I buff them out, they're not, so that's some extra work. But yeah, just have to add it on to the price of the amp when they send me parts that don't just bolt on. So the silver ones obviously match, so that's easy. That's what I'm going to be using with the Habuer iron, and that's kind of how you be able to differentiate between the two product lines. Is the standard stuff will be silver trim, fancier stuff will be gold trim. And I'm using a Hammond AC heater transformer, which is an all-in-one deal, and then Hammond choke. And like I said, the ISO Tango iron has a little, I would say, tighter bass. I don't think the frequency response is that different overall, but I feel like the bass response is a little smoother. And the high frequency stuff doesn't sound that different to me. And so, yes, it's an upgrade, but the Habuer iron sounds really nice too. And I've got a Habuer iron one and I've got a Tango iron one that are built identical, and I probably do prefer the ISO transformer version. That's probably what I'm gonna keep for my personal amp, but the Habuer one sounds really nice too. So don't feel like if you're at this price point, don't feel like, well, I'm not going to buy it because it's an inferior deal. It's pretty subtle, but I'm not going to say it's not audible either. But that's what I'm sticking with this. And I think I talked to you guys about how on a 300B amp, I was trying to build like a 2-tier price point of it. And for whatever reason, at least to my ears, a 300B tube is a lot less forgiving about the quality of the output transformers, and just all the parts in general. And so I'm only going to be building a ISO FC30 transformer model, and a pair of those big ISO transformers that'll work with a 300B. Just the two transformers are over $1,000. So that amp's not going to be cheap. And I've kind of made the decision that I'm not going to build and sell something that I wouldn't listen to. And that's just kind of where I'm going to draw the line. And I know there's folks that were really hoping that we'd have a cheap 300B amp, or a less expensive, maybe even around this price point, and that's just not going to be possible. It's not going to be something I'm going to make. And there's plenty of lower price tier 300B amps that sound bad, that if you really want to be able to put an amp on your shelf and tell your friends, I got a 300B amp, you can go buy some of those products. But I've realized that the 300B tube really needs some big core iron to be able to sound good at output levels that you would want from a 300B tube. And honestly, building a 300B amp that only makes 6 watts of power doesn't make any sense to me. And, I know there's folks that are, got clips, La Scalas or stuff that, only need 1 or 2 watts of power that you could probably drive with an EL84 in triode mode amp. But I'm not going to build 300B amps for that market only. For only super high efficiency speakers, and that have little tiny transformers that, sound okay down at 2 or 3 watts. If you're going to do that, buy a 2A3. The tubes are cheaper. I think a 2A3 tube sounds better than a 300B tube, just in general. It just doesn't have enough power for some uses. And so that's why I'm kind of building these different tiers of things. And if you need the 7 to 8 watts of power and you're on a budget, then buy one of my EL34 amps that's, a pentode that's wired in ultralinear, that's going to make more power than a triode does, and it will fill that niche that a budget 300B would when somebody needs 7 or 8 watts of power. I think that EL34 is like 7 watts. It's more than the 2A3, but it's not going to sound like a really nice 300B amp does either. But again, EL34 is a much more forgiving tube, and it doesn't seem to really make a whole lot of difference what transformers you use. And again, there is a difference between those musical power supply 15 watt transformers that I've been using on those amps, which are really nice transformers for that use, and the FC12S's, which are also an option on the EL34 amp. You get a little cleaner bass, but there's nothing wrong with the way the lower tier transformers sound either, if you need to be at that price point. So that's kind of what I'm going to be doing, is EL34, 2A3 is kind of the middle of the road. And again, I'm using new production. This isn't designed for the old vintage RCA 2A3 tubes that you can only get 3.5 watts of power out of. These are designed for the new production tubes, like JJ makes some. The Horizon tubes will handle 28 watts instead of 15 that the old RCAs would. The EML, the non-mesh ones, this isn't designed for the mesh plate EML tubes. If you want to use the 300B 2.5 mesh, they'll work in this amp. And I've just found, I think this amp sounds best using a 5V4 rectifier tube. It's indirectly heated. You could probably push even running a 5A or 4 tube, but again, I think the 5V4 sounds great. They're plentiful, new old stock, and the amp's just got a really nice sound set up like this. So definitely finalized my 2A3 build. We're not doing any more revisions or testing or whatever. This is great. This is a really nice sounding amp, and easy to get tubes for, and it puts out right at maybe a little over 5 watts of power, which is bordering on what some other folks' 300B amps that make 6 watts, and you're not going to hear a watt different in power. My 300B amps are going to make 8 watts, solid 8 watts before they start clipping or the distortion gets to an objectionable level. And I feel like that if you're going to make a 300B amp, it needs to be at that power level. It has the big 30 watt iron that will support having the bass and everything that you expect out of a 300B tube. So that's what I'm going to be focused on. And like I said, you probably saw me, or if you didn't, I did an earlier video, I'll put it in the link below, where I tested about a half a dozen different output transformers. And, I didn't want to, I hope it didn't come across wrong that, like, Thermionic Labs sent me a 4K, big core output transformer. But when you increase the impedance, even if you get the ideal operating point for that transformer, it's going to be down on power versus what a good 3.5K. And if you can get the sound and the low distortion in check with a lower impedance transformer, it's going to make more power. And so it's not bashing anything about the transformer they made. So anyway, if you got an application that needs a 4K transformer, that's a great performer. But I need a 3.5K, and that's why I picked the Tango or the ISO FC30 over the Thermionic Labs 4K, was simply that the 3.5K makes the power level that I'm looking for, which is 8 watts. And so at the voltage and everything that I'm running that 300B tube at, which is pretty reasonable operating point, that's going to have a super long life. And when you're paying $1,000 for a pair of 300B tubes, like some EMLs or some, the PS Vane Summits, you don't want to be running them on the ragged edge where they're going to have a short life and you replace them every couple of years. I want the tubes to last 5 to 10 years, and that's why I'm running them at 70%, which is where a 300B tube, to me, sounds good. It's possible I could have biased up those 300B tubes way hotter to run them at 4K and get the same 8 watts of power. I just don't see the advantage of doing that. And I do have a project that those 4K transformers are going to get used for, but that's in the future. Hope you've enjoyed this video about why I'm building my 2A3 and 300B amps the way I am. Something to think about if you're in the market for a 300B amp, what to look for. And again, I would not be buying a 300B amp that's not making 8 watts of power, because that's what they should be making. And that should be why you're buying a 300B versus a 2A3, is because it's got that 3 watts or almost 50% more power than a 2A3 amp does. And if it doesn't, yeah, there's a reason why. So anyway, hope you're enjoying this content. If you are, please subscribe. Please like the video. Thanks to all you Patreon supporters, other people that support my channel by buying my products or making donations or being a viewer. And hopefully we can get to 25K subs by this summer. I think we just passed 22K, which is amazing. And maybe one day I can have 100K and get the little YouTube thing, or maybe I should get a fake one at 25K. What do you think? Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you for the next video. Till then, have a nice day.